Hello, good morning, everyone. So, yesterday we had started discussing the role of women, and in which we were saying that there is a changing role of women because of various factors like urbanization, globalization. And we have already looked into the relationship between the changing role of women and urbanization and globalization. Then we were talking about what are the various forms of gender inequality when it comes to women. And we had already discussed natality and mortality inequality on the basis of gender. Now, the next form of inequality is basic facility inequality. When you think of basic facility, you have to think in terms of health and education. Now, this basic because having a basic school education is a basic facility. So, in basic facility, you have to think about health and education as well. Now, let's look at a few numbers. When it comes to the levels of nutrition, because nutrition is one of the most important determinant when it comes to health. So when you think of nutrition, you find that it is generally women in whom you find below the normal body mass index and rising cases of obesity. Now you would think that if you are talking about nutrition, if you're talking about malnutrition, how can you talk about obesity? But you see that malnutrition manifests itself in two ways. One is undernutrition and the other one is overnutrition. So basically, if you are consuming more than required calories per day, but they are not nutritious, they do not have the required number of macronutrients and micronutrients. That is what leads to obesity. Now, obesity is to be understood as a lifestyle disease because generally it is because of our sedentary lifestyle. It is because of our no, because not we are not having nutritious diet or balanced diet that we encounter this problem. Similarly, and again all this data is coming from NFHS 5, women in the age group of 15 to 49 years, 50% of them are anemic. Anemic is again a disease on the basis of deficiency, but when you look at the number in men, it is 25%. So more than twice the number of men, women are anemic. Now, then we were talking about maternal mortality rate, and we were saying that during this process of conceiving a baby, a lot of women lose their life. Now, this is also directly related to nutrition and institutional births. So, if you're not having that process done in an institutional facility, the chances are high that you might lose your life. Now, when it comes to institutional birth, it does not necessarily mean that you have to go to a hospital or a primary care center. If there is a doctor, there is a nurse available at your home, it is also considered to be an institutional birth. But if you look at the number, more than 10% of women still give birth outside these institutional facilities. They do not avail these kind of facilities, rather they are not able to afford these facilities. Then you'll find it is generally the poorest of the poor who are either not aware, or also it can be extended to remote areas where you do not have access to healthcare. And when we come to healthcare, you have to remember these points. When we come to healthcare, you'll find that access to healthcare is a problem, unavailability of beds in hospital is a problem, and we will be talking in direction of universal health coverage. So we'll take it up with our topic health, but you have to understand that how this basic facility inequality when it comes to say education and health pans out. Now then, if you take up women between the age group of 15 to 24 years, more than 20% of them are not aware about various hygienic methods of protection during their menstrual period. They're not aware that they can use pads. And you see that sanitary pads, availability of sanitary pads is a problem in rural areas and your remote areas. Then also it comes to the affordability part, that they are either not affordable, accessible, else the women are not aware about these kind of methods. They're using a traditional method wherein they use a cloth. And you see that when it comes to your menstrual cycle, there are other taboos as well. So you would have heard that during your menstrual period, you are not supposed to, the women are not supposed to enter the kitchen of the household. They are not supposed to enter temples for that matter. These are what? These are various forms of gender inequality. Now, when it comes to school education, with education, I'll show you the numbers with ACER report, etc., everything. You'll find that there is a high dropout rate when it comes to women or girls. The dropout rate and the attendance rates are low. But when it comes to the enrollment ratio, now you see that most of the boys and girls get enrolled in schools. And we will come back to those numbers. Now, to address this gender inequality, when it comes to basic facilities, you have various programs like Poshan, which targets nutrition. Similarly, you have Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana for pregnant and lactating women. So government intervention is there. Then also you can talk about various awareness programs, promotive healthcare. So through Ayush Ministry, they are popularizing yoga. Through Ayush Ministry, they are popularizing traditional medicine, which also goes a long way in addressing this problem of basic facility inequality. Because when it comes to traditional medicine, we know that it is accessible because those methods are available within your household. You can just talk to your parents and you'll get to know about those methods. Similarly, this traditional medicine is affordable, is cheap compared to their allopathic counterparts. And also at times we find that this traditional medicine has a cure for various diseases which allopathy doesn't. Take example of liver. So apart from liver transplant, which is a short say way to fix the problem, you find that traditional medicine is something which can help you with that and not allopathic medicine. And we will be coming to traditional medicine when we take up our chapter on health. Moving on to inequality in education. Now this data is coming from NFHS 5, but also you have to see ACER report. Now this ACER report comes from an NGO called Pratham, and need not remember anything now because we are going to use this ACER report to prepare our background for education and particularly school education. So they conduct a widespread survey across the country, but particularly in rural areas, wherein they look at all these aspects: gross enrollment ratio, attendance of students and teachers, what are the basic facilities available in the school, etc. But you have to remember that it is limited to rural areas. Here if you find, here if you look, that girls between the age of 15 and 16 are not enrolled in school, and the number is as high as 8%. So the gross enrollment at the start of the session or at the start of the school education is doing wonders now. It is very good. But if you look at the enrollment ratio between this age group, you find that more than 7% of the women or the girls do not enroll in these classes, because somewhere this is post your 10th standard. Because generally around the age of 15 and 16, you cover your 10th standard. Now, can anyone here suggest why at all do we find this dip when it comes to enrollment in school and in this particular age group? What can be the reasons for this particular age group? Because if say 100 girls are getting enrolled after the age of 3 or 4, and we are seeing that only about 92 girls make it to 11th standard or +1. That means there is a dropout. Okay, so Aditya is talking about early marriage, and absolutely yes, early marriage is one of the most important factors when it comes to dropout from schools. They are vulnerable at this age. There can be a problem related to basic facilities like toilets, separate toilets for girls in schools. And also you find that there are more instances of harassment in public. Then it can be owed to the fact that to go to your school, to reach your school, you have to take a particular way. In remote areas particularly, you find that the terrain is difficult. These high schools can be far away from your place of residence. Now, to compensate for the travel, and the parents understand this, that they would not be able to send them because there is no public transport and they do not have any private means to go to the school. And now here you'll find that providing bicycle to girls during elections, as promises during elections, or maybe some can say that handouts during election, bicycle is provided to girls, to young girls. Now you see, yes, it is a populist measure. Yes, it is to consolidate the vote bank. But also you find this is in the direction of avoiding dropouts from schools, ensuring good attendance in schools, so that they can tomorrow take admission in higher educational institutions. Then there can be other factors like poverty. And you find because of inequality within our households, within our families, it is generally the boys who get the opportunity to go out and work, to go to the school. And girls are the ones who are supposed to take care of household business. That they are supposed to help their mothers, help their parents in housemaking. Why? Because tomorrow they are supposed to get married and they should better be trained in all these things. This is where the problem is. But it is this dropout is not just limited to girls. A lot of boys also drop out of school after this particular age. The reason is, the primary reason is child labor. Here you see early marriages, poverty, and then you can think of household work, that they have to drop out. Let's look at your suggestions once. So yes, most of them are employed in household work. They are supposed to take care of their young siblings, sharing household work, lack of facilities, lack of basic facilities like toilets, etc. in schools, economic problems in the family, girls being considered as burden on the family, because ultimately for their education you have to spend some sum or spend some amount. And ultimately, if you spend that amount on their education, what do you do when it comes to dowry? So these are basic problems related to dropouts from schools. Also, from your NFHS 5 data, you find that literacy rate in women is 71.5%. And also you have to remember, when it comes to literacy rate, the factors are very simple, on the basis of which they decide whether a person is literate or not. But still you find that while 84% men are literate, only 70% women are literate in our country. Now we'll be talking about what the government is doing to take care of this basic facility inequality when it comes to school or school education. They have introduced the Gender Inclusion Fund. And again, I'll repeat, this gender is not just limited to girls. It extends to your third gender or your transgenders as well. So they have created a fund. They are going to create a fund which will help them cover the basic problems or the basic monetary aspect which is related to these dropouts. So yes, that's what the basic social setup that we have, that the girl is supposed to, in our patriarchal and patrilineal society, we find that it is generally the girls who will be supposed to take care of the household work. So if they have to take care of the household work, what is the point getting them educated? That's what society thinks. But now you see, if you look at the numbers, now it is not very high. If you go 20 years back in the history, you'll find this number was huge. But now it has come down only to 8%. So yes, it is still a considerable gap, but this gap is being covered, this gap is being filled by our government. Then it comes to spatial opportunity inequality. Now, the first statement says that there is a lack of opportunities for higher education. When it comes to girls, that they do not get opportunities for higher education. But yesterday, if you remember, we were discussing about the gross enrollment ratio or the number of enrollments in higher education. And we had mentioned that it is the number of girls which is more than the number of boys when it comes to enrollment in higher education. Where did that number come from? It came from All India Survey on Higher Education. This was carried out in 21, and we are going to discuss this with higher education. But you have to remember, when we talk about spatial opportunity inequality, we talk primarily about higher education and skilling, so that they get some kind of economic work, economic opportunity outside. But here you find that when it comes to higher education, it is more number of girls who enroll in higher education compared to boys. This is something we are going to take up with higher education in our chapter on education. Similarly, you find that they do not get adequate training opportunities. But yes, there are programs like skill development which are targeting this particular group so that they get skilled, they can take up work. But again, there is a problem with these skilling programs. These skilling programs, if you have ever looked into the courses, what kind of courses you can choose from, girls have options like weaving, stitching, tailoring. These are the kind of works which are generally stereotyped, that it is a stereotype that girls are supposed to take up the stitching and tailoring work, which is not very remunerative. So when it comes to our skilling programs, we find that these stereotypes play a big role. But yes, the government has been putting up, putting in efforts. They are talking about industrial training institutes. They are talking about vocational institutes. Then also you find there is a push towards entrepreneurial activities. Now, it is not only the government who's trying to push that, but also your various civil society organizations like self-help groups. They are also putting in efforts. They are also gathering women, saying that, see, the condition, the economic condition of your family is not good. And also, there is a lot of gender inequality within your household, in the society. You do not get a good status. But the day you start earning some money, the day you start contributing to the family income, you'll have more say in the family. And they bring those women together, create these self-help groups, and start with that money, with that pool of money, they can start any kind of business activity. And we are going to, do not worry, we are also going to cover these self-help groups. But the point is, when it comes to, say, taking care of gender inequality, it is not just the government or government initiatives. You also have brilliant examples of civil society organizations taking up this task, wherein they employ the women, wherein they create business opportunities for women. But again, there is a limited scope of these self-help groups, etc. And there are problems associated with these self-help groups. But we are going to take up those problems when we discuss our self-help groups, NGOs, and your cooperative society. Then also, moving forward, you find there is inequality when it comes to work. There is professional inequality, starting from the work rate participation. The labor participation rate in women is way lower compared to men. That means it is still men who are going out for work. It is still men who are involved in paid activities. And only a small number of women get their share in in labor, in any kind of economic opportunities outside the sphere of household. So starting from low labor participation rate, you find there is inequality when it comes to paying them off. So for the same work, they do not get equal income. Just look at your daily wage laborers as well. Think of people working at construction site. Let's forget about the organized sector and look at the unorganized sector ones. So even when it comes to daily wages for men and women, we find that women are paid less compared to men. Just go to any construction site, go survey, check with them that what is the daily wage that they are getting. And you find inequality, you find disparity there as well. Then moving on, you find that they are supposed to work for longer hours compared to men, and they get paid less. Then they can be exploited at workplace. This exploitation can also extend to various forms of harassment, sexual harassment at the workplace. So we were saying that now women are going out for work, which is a good thing, which is a wonderful thing. But now they are more vulnerable to violence, because previously there was violence against women within the household. It was either domestic violence or spousal violence. But now the violence is extended to their workplace as well. The violence is extended to the public sphere that they enter, because they have to take buses, they have to take trains, they have to take public transport to reach their place of work. Because when we think about women who are working, it is not just women working in the service sector, in white collar jobs. No, it is not just that. There are other women working in the unorganized sector. There are women who are working in the industrial sector. So they can get harassed, they can get exploited at workplace as well. Then also you find when it comes to the matters of promotion, there is a concept of glass ceiling. Now, if the ceiling of your room is made of glass, that means you can see through it, you can see the sky, but you cannot reach it. You can see anything that is beyond the ceiling because it is made out of glass, but you cannot reach it. Similar thing happens when it comes to the matters of promotion in women. You find that when it comes to uh, good jobs, when it comes to your organized sector jobs, less and less number of women are found at the top position. It is generally the men who take up majority share when it comes to top ranking officials, when it comes to say big entrepreneurs. It is generally men who take up those positions. Now, can you say that it is only limited to the skill set that men have? Yes, we can say that they have been engaged in business. So if it is a business family, generally it is the male members of the family who get engaged in business right from early ages, because they have to take over. This is what is supposed. But there can be women within the household or within the family who have better business acumen compared to those people, compared to the male members of the family, but they still would not get that opportunity. So this is what, when it comes to promotion, this is the idea of glass ceiling. Then also you find that when it comes to, say, interviews within your organized sector, now organized sector, you have maternity leaves, you have Maternity Benefit Act of 2016, which talks about maternity leaves. Now, one of the frequently asked questions, if any of the girls here in the classroom would ever have been to an interview, and maybe they are slightly on the say elder side, you find one of the frequently asked question is about your marriage. When are you planning to get married? Are you planning to say start a family anytime soon? These are one of the frequently asked questions during these interviews in organized sector. Why? Because if tomorrow they plan family, the company, the organization would have to give maternity relief. The organization would have to give them leaves, paid leaves. These also become matters or factors which impact getting them inducted in any kind of work. So forget about their skills, forget about their education, forget about how positively they can contribute to the say workplace and their work. They ask questions, very personal questions about their marriage and family planning. Then also you find most of the women, even in your organized sector, are found in pink collar jobs. Now pink I hope you understand this idea that when it comes to industrial work or any kind of work for which you have to get involved manually, for which manual labor is required, those are termed as blue collar jobs. Then when it comes to service sector jobs, which are primarily your desk jobs, those are considered to be white collar jobs. But then you have pink collar jobs. That means there are few sectors where you find disproportionate number of women working in those sectors. Take idea about the nursing sector, the healthcare sector. Most of your nurses are women. Similarly, think about telecalling jobs. Think about hospitality jobs. More often than not, if you enter the premises of a hotel, of a bank, more often than not, you'll find a woman sitting on the reception desk. Similarly, other jobs like air hostess. Yes, there are stewards as well, but it is primarily your air hostess which take up that sector. So your hospitality sector, your telecalling jobs, nursing jobs are generally taken up by women. And that's why they are termed as pink collar jobs, because of the stereotype pink that is associated with women. Now, what is the problem? You would say that ultimately they are getting employed. Ultimately, they are getting work opportunities. But you see that these jobs are dead-end jobs. You do not have a lot of scope of getting promoted. Where do you go with a promotion from the reception? Because at the reception, they need someone to whom they do not have to pay a lot. Their wages, their salaries will remain stagnant for 5, 6, 7 years. And post that, they'll employ someone else who's young. Similarly, there are other kind of jobs where your physical appearance matters a lot. Think of your modeling jobs, which are also primarily taken up by women. Once they start aging, they are being pushed out of the system and they land where you do not have any kind of opportunities. Because apart from modeling, apart from being very presentable in front of the camera, they do not have any other skill set. Where do they get employed once they age? Similarly, whenever you take a flight, how often do you find very old or aged women who take up the air hostess job? What happens to them? Because after a certain age, after their physical appearance changes, and particularly after childbirth, they are being pushed out of the system and they find themselves jobless. These are all the problems related to professional inequality. And this is something that we observe on a regular basis. Now, what the government is doing, they are talking about reservation to women in jobs. They're talking about skilling women so that they can get a better job. Also, they're talking about working women hostels. If you go to metro cities, you'll find working women hostels, because even your service sector jobs can there can be a component of travel. So because of this traveling, families would think about the safety of the girl or the uh, uh, say women of the family first, and they would say that you're not safe outside. It's better you drop this job and maybe look for something else. But now government is coming up with these working women hostels where you can get your safety, you can get basic amenities. And now they're thinking about extending these working women hostels to rural areas as well, so that women are safe, so that they can travel for work and they do not have to drop the job just for the sake of traveling. So these are the kind of government initiatives when it comes to professional inequality. Then you have sexual harassment at workplace. You have maternity relief, so that women who are bearing children or who are going to bear a child, they can get relief from the office, they get paid leaves. And I hope everyone here has gone through Maternity Benefit Act 2016. So all these things, but everything has a flaw. We are saying because of this Maternity Benefit Act, women are not getting inducted in the services. The sexual harassment at workplace also has a very limited scope, because first thing that has to be done is an internal inquiry. And you see that most of our organizations are again patriarchal in nature. There is no you do not find a lot of women in the top positions. And generally what happens is, in that internal inquiry, the matter is subdued, is suppressed, and the culprit is not held responsible for the same. And generally it happens other way around. The person is pushed out, that lady, that woman is pushed out of the system, they are being laid off. That is what happens. Then moving on to your ownership inequality, that when it comes to matter of holding property, we were saying that yes, now we have the act, we have the succession act, wherein the girls of the family also hold an equal share in the ancestral property. But you find that it is not being used to a great extent, because what generally happens is, the family says yes, you can take your property. The first thing is that they'll deny outrightly that we are not going to give you a share in the property. And if at all they agree, they say that yes, you take your share, but then you do not remain a member of this family. Then you never come back to our place and never call us your brothers and sisters, for that matter. And that's why you find that there is a limited use of this succession act, and generally the property is still transferred towards the male side. You can think about the same thing in your families. What if your aunt tomorrow comes and says that I also should get an equal share when it comes to the family ancestral property? How often do you find that your aunts have a share in the family property. And if they ask for it, everyone in the family will come together and say that yes, let's give them this share in property, but we are not going to have any relationship whatsoever with them. So all the future ties will be broken if you take your share in property. And this is where you find that your Hindu Succession Act has also failed to a great extent. But now you find that yesterday I had asked you a question, that still there is a rise in the number of property registered under the name of women in every state, and overall numbers you'll find that there has been a rise, bearing a few exceptions. The reason is, when it comes to registering the property, if you register the property in the name of a woman, in the name of your mother, sister, or your wife, you get rebate close to 1% uh, tax that the government takes, or the registration fee that government takes. They the registration rates for women is 1% less compared to men, and that's why you find that the property that is in their name, they are not the persons, or the women do not have a full control over that property. It is generally kept in their name so that the family can save on the registration fee. This is what the state of our system is. This is what the state of our society is. And when I tell you these things, I think everyone can relate to these things within their family, within their household. Then when it comes to inequality, we are saying that women have less chances of getting employed. Women have less chances of holding a property. Women have less and less financial independence. What does that mean? It means that women are, more number of women are poor compared to the men. That is what the idea of feminization of poverty is. And you find this on an increasing trend, that increasingly more and more number of women live below the standard of poverty. So we say that in poverty we create a threshold, that this is the basic minimum standard, this is the poverty line. If this poverty line can be calculated using your multidimensional poverty index, it can be on the basis of your consumption patterns, it can be on the basis of your expenditure patterns, etc. But they say this is the minimum threshold, and you find that there is an increasing trend of inequality when it comes to people below poverty line, that more and more number of women are found below this poverty line. Then also it can be understood as that when it comes to poverty, particularly your multidimensional poverty index, there are multiple factors in there, and you'll find that it is generally women who lag behind in all those indicators. So for instance, one of the indicators talks about clean cooking fuel, that whether the household is using clean cooking fuel. So you'll find there that it is generally the women of the family who have to take care of the say cooking needs of the family, and they will be the ones who will be deprived in that indicator. Similarly, we have looked at the numbers of nutrition. So again, it is mostly women who are deprived in that indicator, and we see it is because of inequality. It is not something biological. It is because the women are not being provided with adequate nutrition. Why? Because it is considered the one who is going out to work for any kind of paid labor should be the ones who should get more amount of nutrition. This is what we have in our families. They do not consider the unpaid labor taken up by women to be as productive, even though women are the one who say who have to say put in more efforts, put in more time when it comes to household work. So we have talked about two three phenomena. One, we were talking about ruralization of elderly population in your aging chapter. Then we had discussed about feminization of elderly population, and now we are talking about feminization of poverty. Similarly, there's one more thing which talks about feminization of agriculture, that more and more women are taking up agriculture in rural areas. Now you can again say, okay, the annotated PPTs are of geography which are getting opened up. Okay, sure. I'll just inform the team and they will fix this issue. Okay, so another phenomena is feminization of agriculture. Now, feminization of agriculture means that more and more number of women are taking up agriculture. And again, you can say it is a good trend that not every uh, household allowed their women to take up agriculture in the past. But here you find that it is because of male working population. It is because of your male working age population which migrates to urban areas in search of job opportunities or in search of any kind of economic opportunity, that it is women, elderly, and the children left behind in the villages. And if you remember, we were talking about the same phenomena in the case of Bihar. Now, your male working age population has migrated from this rural area to urban area. This is your male working age population. And we were talking about what will be the demographic effects of this migration on rural areas and urban areas. Now, I'll ask you a question. If male working age population migrates to urban areas, who all are left here? You'll say it is the children, elderly, and the women of the family who are left behind in these rural areas. Can your children and elderly take up agriculture? The answer is no, because the children do not know, they do not have the required skill set. And the elderly are too old to perform any kind of physical labor, because agriculture also involves a lot of physical labor. So it is generally the women who are left behind to take care of agricultural activities. Now, also, I'll ask you a question. That because of this migration of male working age population, yes, we can say that agriculture is being taken up by women. There can be an impact on women. Now, think of your institutions of family. What kind of impact this institution of family will have? How this institution of family will change with your male working age population migrating out of rural areas? Can you please suggest? Because this is simply a brainstorming exercise, but they still might ask a direct question on this. What is the consequence of this migration? So we have already looked at the consequence of migration on these urban areas, and to a limited extent, we had looked at the demographic consequences of this migration on rural areas. But what will be the consequence of this migration on the institution of family? Okay, so you're talking about the emotional needs of family members. Then Ragini is talking about there'll be a gap in family relations. So basically, she's trying to say that when it comes to the husband and wife bond, I'm not saying it'll break down, but there'll be certainly some kind of, say, dilution of this bond. This bond will not be as strong as it was before. Great. Then also, you find that when it comes to the authority distribution, which is a positive sign, when it comes to authority distribution, now it'll be in favor of women. With the male working age population gone out, women will be the ones who will take care of all the decision making within the household sphere. They'll be the ones who will take all the decisions related to agriculture. Also, you'll find when it comes to the work distribution part, it will be women who will have a dual burden of work. Now, these women will have to take care of the household work, and they also would have to take care of any kind of economic opportunities, or they would have to get involved in agriculture. Then Ragini has suggested that because the agriculture is no more productive, agriculture requires inputs, agriculture is again dependent on monsoon. Now it'll be again women who will be on the losing side, because they'll be the ones who would have to request others for money. They would have to go to the money lenders, and the chances of them getting exploited are very high because of low awareness levels in women. Because these money lenders are like sharks, they'll eat your land away. They keep your land as mortgage, give you some money. If you are not able to pay it in time, they'll take away your land. And you find a lot of instances of the same happening. But also, there'll be this dual burden of work on women. So yes, it will be a shift from a patriarchal setup, because now women will be in a position to take decisions within the household. They'll have a better status when it comes to their family. But again, they'll have a lot to lose as well. This will be the impact of this migration. And great that you are putting across these points. This shows that if at all a bouncer is being thrown at you in the mains examination, you are very well able to answer these questions. So if you want to think of the impact on women as a section, you say that in the economic sphere, they'd have more autonomy. They would have to, they'll get involved in paid labor, but again, there'll be dual burden of work. Similarly, when it comes to their socio-cultural life, you'll find they'll have more autonomy within the household. They'll have a better status because now it is primarily women across the village who are taking up these economic activities. So they'll have a better status, which will lead to their empowerment. They'll take better decisions when it comes to the education of their children. They'll be the ones in charge of any kind of decision making. Also, you'll find that there'll be political empowerment because now it is the women who are left behind. And then again, it'll be the women who will be contesting your PRI elections. Panchayati Raj institutions will again be taken up by women. And there are more chances of them associating with each other on a social level. With their awareness, with the freedom, they'll have more opportunities of forming self-help groups for the betterment of their family, for the betterment of their society. So yes, there is a positive aspect, but again, a negative aspect as well. Because we see that the agriculture is struggling, the agriculture is not productive. And because agriculture is not productive, this male working age population has migrated out. Now, women would have to deal with that burden. Women would have to deal with the problems related to agriculture. Women would have to deal with all the manual labor, with no one, absolutely no one there to help them out. So these can be a few ideas related to this. Moving on, let's think of gender inequality when it comes within the household. Now, household inequality has been very well covered with the institutions of family and marriage. I hope everyone is aware when it comes to authority distribution, when it comes to work distribution, when it comes to status of women, all those aspects have been covered. Add to that your full responsibility of household work and dual burden of work. What does this image depict? That this woman is basically taking care of all the household work and also going out to work for paid labor. So they have what? Dual burden of work. And this dual burden of work, I think you would have already understood with the agriculture example. Moving on, let's think of gender inequality when it comes to politics. Now, you already know about the Women Reservation Bill. Let's not get into the factual details. Let's not get into the, delimitation exercise, etc. Just think about this. When you look at your right to representation, we find that it is generally the women who lag behind when it comes to representation. Look at the number of women in your parliament. Look at the number of women in your state legislatures. Look at the number of women in Rajya Sabha. Look at the number of women who contest elections. Everywhere they lag behind. There are multiple reasons for the same. There are reasons related to patriarchy. There are reasons which extend to, the struggles that you have to go through when it comes to, say, politics. Because again, in politics, you would have to deal with public on a regular basis, which most of the families would not agree to. Then also there can be safety issues. We have seen women parliamentarians being thrown out of parliament at times. There have been instances of harassment against them. But then you have reservation for women in your urban local bodies and your Panchayati Raj institutions, right? There is reservation. And now this women reservation bill is talking about reservation in legislature. But there you find that even though they have right to representation, but generally it is because of this reservation that the political families do not have an option but to let the women of the family contest elections. Yes, they do contest elections, they win at times, they lose at times, but ultimately their social or personal life does not change. They still remain within the household sphere, and then you have the concept of Panchpati, Pradhanpati. that in place of the women, in place of the wife who contested and won the elections, it will be her husband or her father or her brother who would take up all the activities. And now this is a reference from one of the uh, series called Panchayat, where you have this concept of Pradhanpati. And similarly, the day Women Reservation Bill came out or was passed, became an act, the discussion was about how this concept of Panchpati would get extended to Sansadpati. Why? Because of the patriarchal norms of a family and a society at large. Then when it comes to politics, there are two ideas. I've already told you, one is representation and the other one is right to vote. Now, everyone has a right to vote, but how often do women independently, autonomously exercise their right to vote? Don't you see that it is generally the whip of the eldest male member of the family who would say that our community is going to vote for a person coming from our community, from our caste, from our religion, and everyone has to vote for them. They do not get to exercise their right to vote. This right to vote becomes phony. That yes, it is there, but they do not have that right. They are not exercising that right. They are being told whom to vote for. So that's where you find inequality when it comes to politics. Now, this is also an article about the underrepresentation of women in bureaucracy and politics. So you can just go through this and it'll give you a couple of examples to be mentioned if at all something regarding political inequality finds a mention in the paper. Then apart from this, there are a few other issues. Issues like if you take up interreligious or intercaste marriage, there can be instances of honor killing. And I don't think that everything, all these things that are mentioned here, apart from a couple, that you would not understand. These are all the issues that you understand. These are all the issues that find a mention in your current affairs. These are all the issues which are widely discussed and debated in society and in your newspapers. So honor killing, basically, because generally women are considered to be honor of the family, because we have an obsession, because when it comes to say wars, generally women are the ones who will be made targets. They get say, even though it is generally the male members who will go and fight wars, but again women become objects of war. Similarly, you find that if at all someone goes through an intercaste marriage or an interreligious marriage, now these are just examples. What I'm basically trying to say is, if anyone, we were talking when we started our discussion with society, we said there are few societal norms. You are celebrated if you follow these societal norms, but if you do not follow these societal norms, there can be a penalty. You can be penalized for the same. Now, when it comes to intercaste marriages and your interreligious marriages, which are against the societal norms, so what often happens is that the family of either the girl or the boy will catch that runaway couple and kill them. That is what honor killing is. Because it is considered that if you go against these societal norms, if you go against the will of the family, you have tampered the honor of the family. And for the sake of restoring that honor, you are carrying out this killing. You are killing your own children. You are killing someone who's related to you by blood, just to restore that quote unquote lost honor of the family. This is what honor killing is. Similarly, we say that sexual harassment, rape, etc., are again widely prevalent in our society, which is a problem. And now this rape also extends to marital rape. Rape is, your sexual intercourse that happens in which one of the members has not given their consent. And the Honorable Supreme Court was of the view, it does not matter whether you are married or not. If a woman says no, it means no. If there is no consent, there cannot be any kind of sexual activity that can happen. That is what the idea of marital rape is. Because what happens is, the concept, the idea of marriage says that it is generally women who are subordinated to men. Women are considered to be objects of sexual pleasure of men. And this is the concept of marital rape is a departure from this concept. And that's why they said it does not matter whether you are married or not. If a girl says no, if a woman says no, it means no. That is what the idea of marital rape is. Then you find cybercrime, that with proliferation of technology, you find everyone has a smartphone. But generally you find, because of the literacy levels, because of the awareness levels, women are more vulnerable when it comes to matters of cybercrime, because they would not know what to give permission to. Similarly, you find the idea of objectification of women. Now, objectification simply means considering something as an object, considering a person, a human, or an animal as an object. That means they do not have feelings. They are not supposed to have any kind of views. This is what objectification means, because this object that I have here, it doesn't have any perspective, it doesn't have any views, it doesn't have any feelings. So considering them like objects which are meant for sexual pleasure of men, which are meant to take care of household work with no emotions involved whatsoever, this is what objectification of women is. Now, this objectification of women is also on rise, because this objectification of women was limited to household sphere, but now it extends beyond the household sphere. Because with the expansion of mass media, you find that you cannot, I don't think in the, in past 5-7 years, you would not find a blockbuster hit or a box office hit without an item song. They would fit in any kind of item song anywhere. Not wearing appropriate clothes, etc., clothing is also has been considered empowerment by a few, but then again, it is also an idea of objectification of women. The way I was saying that after a certain age, they're pushed out of this hospitality sector. How often do you find very old ladies sitting at the desk or sitting at the reception of a hotel? How often do you find aged women carrying out modeling or taking up to modeling? The examples, if at all are there, will be exceptions. But the general rule is, after a certain age, because the body will start, say, changing, there'll be physical changes and there'll be changes related to appearance. And once that happens, they're pushed out. Why? Because now they would not be attractive for that matter. This also is objectification of women. So they are limited to entertaining men. They're limited to sexual pleasure of men. They're limited to taking care of all the activities for men. This is what objectification of women is. Then there is this concept of surrogacy, that if at all a family is not able to bear children, they can basically ask someone, because one way is to adopt a children, but if they want someone biologically related to them, they can have a surrogate mother who can bear that child for them. Now, there as well, you find there have been instances where, after ultrasounds and everything, the child in the womb was found to have some kind of deformity or disability. And what happens is, in those cases, the biological parents, the ones who are supposed to be biological parents tomorrow, they escape. They run away from their responsibility. And they say, if the child is not healthy, we would not take care of you. We would not take care of the child. Either you abort it or you keep it to yourself. Then also there is the emotional connect of the mother and the children. But generally what happens is, the surrogate mothers do not get any rights over the children that they bear for 9 months, to whom they are emotionally attached. So it comes to the rights, etc., of surrogate mothers. And this is something that you have to cover in current affairs with the surrogacy regulation bill that was there. Moving on, now you have, we were saying that the institution of marriage is changing, and now you have more and more number of divorces coming up, because we were saying that marriage, from an intergenerational contract, from something that spans over, say 7 births and 7 generations, it has become a mere contractual affair. So you have more number of divorced people, you have more and more number of separated women, you have more and more number of single women. Because generally what happens, after the divorce happens, the original family of the girl or the woman do not take them as family members. They ask them to maybe live somewhere else. Yes, they might agree to taking care of their, say, economic financial needs, but they would say that you cannot stay with us. And now these single women are more vulnerable to sexual harassment. Now these single women have safety related issues. They have economic dependency, because alimony money, you never know what happens, because the cases go on, the litigation goes on for years altogether in the court. Who takes care of the women then? Then now you have more instances of deserting elderly women. If you go to various religious places, you'll find that most of the uh, people who are engaged in begging are generally elderly women. That people very shamelessly, because they know that they do not have any property in their name, and they push them out of the family, they push them out of the house, desert them somewhere, they leave for foreign countries, they sell off all the property, and they are left to themselves to cater to their needs and demands. And you already know that we do not have sufficient number of old age homes. And again, you know that the proportion of elderly women is increasing. So these women get deserted. Who takes care of their safety issues, etc.? Honor killing has been explained. The current president is women. Yes, it is. She is. Yeah, so Pritesh, you have typed this statement, because it's not a question. This statement at least 7 times. Okay, I understand the urgency of the statement. The statement says, during the time of foreign power, many inter-religious marriages took place for converting the religion. Yes, they did. If that was the statement, yes, they did. Great. Please try to stick to the point. Please try to understand what we are trying to say. And if at all you have a question, I'm not against any kind of question. You do ask your questions. But please do not type it more than once, because it gets flooded, and the questions and the observations of other students, they get pushed aside. So please try to write and type your question only once. Now you see that there is a new concept of gender budgeting, which is also a way to elevate women and to say get rid of the gender inequality that is prevalent in our society. So gender budgeting does not mean that you should have a specific outlay for women. But gender budgeting means that whatever outlay, so for example, they have given a budget for, say, your for education. Now, what you have to do is, what they have to take care of is that this budget, the way it is used, how is it going to impact the this particular section of society? Because the same budget will have a differential impact, and the same investment, the same infrastructure will have a differential impact on both men and women. So gender budgeting is a practice wherein you observe, because it is not a one-time activity. You keep observing that what kind of impact is it having on women. So if they have introduced LPG cylinders, because we are saying that clean cooking fuel is an indicator where a lot of people are deprived, where a lot of households are deprived. So that's why you have this scheme called Ujjwala Yojana, wherein they provide clean cooking fuel to women. Now, this is again a step in the direction of women empowerment, because this unclean cooking fuel was basically making or creating respiratory problems for women. Then again, they would have to go out and fetch all the material. They would have to fetch timber to be used for cooking, etc. So to keep them away from all those problems, they provided them clean cooking fuel. Now, this clean cooking fuel, providing this clean cooking fuel, will have an impact on women, will also have an impact on poverty. So yes, the poverty will go down, because a lot many people who were deprived of this particular commodity, they would not be deprived so far. Uh, uh, they would not be deprived then. But then gender budgeting says that if at all these things are done, any kind of, say, budgeting practice is done, any kind of policy program, if at all is being carried out, you have to, throughout the implementation phase, you have to keep an eye, how is it impacting women? This is what the practice of gender budgeting is. And now again, this year they have asked a question which relates in paper 2, which relates to more to implementation and design of policy, but again the impact on women, it was asked. And we are, do not worry, we are again going to discuss similar questions when we take up that chapter. But you have to understand, this gender budgeting practice is also a step in the right direction, because you are not giving them separate budget. All you are doing is you are just looking at the impact of the existing policies and programs on this particular section of the society. So if at all you find that the impact is not good, or there is a difference when it comes to the impact on other sections and women, you can fix that right at the beginning, rather than waiting for the entire policy or the program. Keep an eye throughout the implementation phase. Now, let's move on to what kind of questions they have asked in the past, and we will try to answer a few questions. The first question talks about the positive and negative effects of globalization on women in India. So we have already discussed this. What we are saying, if you want to look at the impact on any particular section, be it women, be it elderly, be it children, what you have to do is you take out the dimensions of their life. Now, this globalization will have impact on each and every dimension. For example, take economic dimension. And if you remember, what we said was, what I said was that it's better to take up these negatives and positives together. So when you take up, say, economic dimension in this question, you say that yes, on the economic front, there have been impacts of globalization on women. Now, the first impact has been that women now can also get work outside the household sphere. They can also get paid labor. So the labor participation rate will increase. Similarly, they'll have more opportunities for work. These can be positives. Now they'll have more opportunities to get jobs. They'll have more opportunities to get credit from other companies, from other banks, etc. These can be positive impacts. But if you look at the negative impacts, you can say that now they have dual burden of work, right? Then you can say there can be problems related to harassment at workplace, which is also an economic dimension. So this way, in this way, what you can do is you take up one dimension of life, say economic dimension, say socio-cultural dimension, and you take up all the positives and negatives together. Because this kind of question can be, there can be an introduction, then in the body part you can have 3-4 paragraphs. So one dedicated to economic, one dedicated to political, socio-cultural, etc., and then you can conclude on a positive note. So I hope you get this answer, because this question has been discussed. All I'm suggesting you is the structure of the answer, that you can write it in paragraphs. Yes, you can definitely write it in points, that is also fine. But if you, when you start looking at this question, rather than going haywire, it is better to keep a structure. So the economic dimension, the socio-cultural dimension, the political dimension. Ragni is suggesting social inclusion. Yes, absolutely yes. So in you can say better status in society. Again, a result, an impact of globalization, because with globalization, one is they get economic opportunity, which raises their status. With globalization, they get exposed to mass media. They get exposed to ideas of liberty, egalitarianism from across the globe. With more awareness, they have better status. So all those impacts, I think we have already discussed the impact of globalization, and along with it, we have also discussed the impact of urbanization. So this is a question which has been already discussed, and you know the structure. Moving on to the next question. This question was left out in the previous chapter. We did not discuss it with population, because now you'll have better points. So empowering women is the key to control population growth. Discuss. This was a very simple question which was asked. Now just think about it. The idea is about controlling population growth, and they are saying how women empowerment can help us in controlling population. Now, one thing you know is, to control population growth, you can have multiple ways. To control population growth, for instance, you can basically say target poverty, because poverty also leads to population growth. To control population growth, you can educate society in general. You can make people more aware about various family planning programs. Right? So there can be multiple ways in which you can control population growth. So it can become your introduction or your conclusion, right? So it can be your conclusion, that it is not just women empowerment through which you can control population growth, but there can be other ways as well, because poverty has a direct relationship with population growth. So if you eradicate poverty, you can control population. So you can use this as your conclusion in this question. Coming to the introduction part. Now, if you think about introduction, one idea is you have to somehow substantiate the statement that is given in the question. Now, to substantiate, and I have already told you how to substantiate this, because you ultimately need facts, you ultimately need stats for this. So if you want to substantiate this, you have to think about the dimensions of women empowerment. Women can be empowered in the political dimension. Women can be empowered in economic dimension. Women can be empowered in social dimension, right? So the dimensions of women empowerment. Now, what you have to do is you have to establish a direct relationship with women empowerment and control in population. So if you see, I had given you this fact that when you think of your urban areas will have more women empowerment. Why? Because of higher levels of education, higher levels of or higher job participation rate, etc., which directly reflects on women empowerment. And at the same time, you'll find that in urban areas, the fertility rates are lower compared to rural areas. What does this depict? This depict that empowering women can lead to control in population growth. Please tell me if this idea is clear. Please tell me if this idea is clear. So empowering women make women educationally powerful. They get jobs, voice in the family. They understand the importance of family planning. More and more children get unmanageable for women because ultimately they are the ones who take care of them, etc. Then Pritesh says sustainable development, controlling population growth, contributes to sustainable development, reducing the strain on resources in the environment. Yes. So please tell me first whether this idea is clear. So we are saying if we want to establish a direct relationship between women empowerment and controlling population growth, this is a good starting point. That you can say that if you take example of urban areas, you find that women are more empowered in urban areas because more and more women engage in paid labor. More and more women are educated. More and more women get involved in politics. More and more women are aware. And ultimately, as a result, you find that the fertility rates are lower compared to rural areas. So this can establish a direct relationship between women empowerment and population growth. So maybe this can become a good introduction. Please suggest if I'm wrong. So this can become a good introduction for this answer, wherein you use stats, you use facts to establish what is there in the statement. Then also in your body part, you are going to talk about how empowering women in all these dimensions can lead to population control. Now think about this. If you remember various factors, which can control population growth, which were discussed by us in the form of fertility rates, factors affecting fertility rate, think about those. We were talking about subordination of women, that women unquestionably accept the will of the family, lower awareness levels in women, lower status of women that shows in subordinate relationship of men and women. Similarly, there were multiple factors related to women like preference to son, etc., given as factors affecting fertility rate, if you remember. So all those factors can be directly linked to these dimensions and mentioned as methods or ways to control population growth. So you can say that if women are politically empowered, they'll have more representation in the legislature, they'll have more say in the legislature. Now these women will be in a position to understand the problems of this particular section of the society, of women of the society, and they'll be able to take it up on the political stage. They'll be able to contest for whatever rights of women are there. Similarly, if they get economic empowerment, they'll take care of their. They'll also have better say in the family. They will be in a position to say no. With their economic empowerment follows their social empowerment. And you say if they are educated, They would know the importance of family planning as suggested by Aditya. So all these factors can directly lead to a control in population growth. But also, what you have to do is just give one line, maybe in the conclusion, because we also know that women empowerment need not necessarily lead to population growth. The statement talks about establishing a direct relationship between women empowerment and population growth, but we also know that women empowerment need not necessarily lead to a control in population growth, because economic empowerment of women would not necessarily mean that they are socially empowered, would not necessarily mean that they'll have better say in the family, would not necessarily mean that they become aware. So you can just give it a very little weightage. Just in a line, you show that how women empowerment need not necessarily be related directly to a control in population growth. So in your conclusion part, you start with this relationship, and then you talk about how there can be other factors which directly impact population control. Okay. Policy support. Governments and organizations should implement policies that support women empowerment. Absolutely, yes. Education and access to healthcare and contraceptives to achieve effective population control. Absolutely, yes. So you can also include it as your conclusion. So because ultimately there is a little negative as well in the body part, so you can use it as conclusion. So you are saying empowering women in population control is a vicious cycle which brings positive impact in society. So a vicious cycle is not, so you can think of a virtuous cycle. It is not a vicious, because opposite of vicious is virtuous. So it can become a virtuous cycle, but I would rather suggest establishing this relationship in the introduction, because otherwise in abstract terms most of the students are going to write that answer. But this is the only way in which you can establish direct relationship between women empowerment and control in population growth. So I would say that please go ahead with this kind of introduction, wherein you talk about fertility rates and the level of women empowerment in urban areas. Because compared to rural areas, women are more empowered in urban areas. And compared to rural areas, the fertility rates in urban areas are lower because of various factors that we have already discussed. So please try to establish this direct relationship. Yes, we do have separate stats for fertility rates in urban and rural areas. So the overall is 2.1, and in rural areas I believe it is 2.3, and in urban areas it is 1.8. You can just go through, and I think it is mentioned in the PPT. We do have separate stats. I think in the PPT on your population it was mentioned. Okay, I hope this question is understood. This is again a simple question, but I need you to understand that you can enrich your answer, because if you understand the question very well, you will be able to say get extra marks, 1 or 2 extra marks in each and every question, because ultimately you have to at least score average marks in each and every question to make it to the final list. Because again, when you look at topper copies, they write average answers, but they write those average answers consistently. That is where the difference is, because a few answers, what we do is we write a few answers brilliantly in the subject of our expertise, but other subjects take a backseat. But here, with the way we are discussing these answers, I believe you are going to get great help when it comes to answer writing in other subjects as well, because you'll find similar kind of questions. So apart from geography, wherein they tend to ask direct questions, in other subjects you find that you have those statements. So you break it up in dimensions, you take up your keywords. Wherever there is a difficult keyword, you try explaining it in the introduction itself. In questions such as these, you do use stats, because no one, absolutely no one, trust me on this, no one would think about this fact or stat which can establish a direct relationship. Now, this is something, when you start with this in introduction, the person who's evaluating, they'll be taken aback. They'll think that, oh my God, how beautifully they have presented this. Because this will be a departure from other answers as well. Because everyone is going to write average, below average answers. And this will be an above average answer, which is going to give you an upper edge. Okay. Moving ahead, this is a practice question, and this is something that I need you to answer. And yesterday we had discussed this question briefly. The question says, trajectory of violence against women commences before birth and endures throughout their lifespans. Discuss. So basically, they're talking about violence against women at each and every stage of their life. But they say that this cycle or this trajectory of violence commences before birth. This is what they're saying. So, first idea is that if you think of their life cycle, you'll find that it starts pre birth. Can someone suggest that, yes, okay, Pratish has done it? Lovely. So, Pratish is talking about female feticide, that how this trajectory of violence commences before birth in the form of feticide, in the form of killing the girl child in the womb itself. That's where the violence starts. And what I've done is, yes, so beginning from sex determination and female feticide, which is illegal, but that's where it starts. So what I've done is I've created, you have the cycle, whereas wherein you have all the issues, all the forms of violence mentioned at each and every stage of women's life. And all you have to do is you create the cycle in your body part, and you start explaining. You start explaining this cycle, and that will be pretty much your answer. Now, if you write so much negative, if you write about so much violence in your body part, what do you do with the conclusion? You conclude it on a positive note. In the conclusion, you say that yes, these forms of violence are there, but then you talk about how things are getting better, looking at stats. Then you can talk about government intervention. Then you can talk about various other suggestions to fix these problems. So you can just go through the cycle, but please do one thing. Before looking at the answer from the PPT, just go through the question once, try conceptualizing it, try writing this answer, and then only go through the cycle that I have mentioned here in this. So violence against women, yes, Aditya. So it comes at a later stage. So let's look at the in the light of this cycle, in the life cycle. Ragini, you are talking about how women played a role during freedom struggle as a conclusion. I would say that it is better to stay away from that because they have not indicated this directly. Yes, we can definitely write their changing role in the world today. So we have already discussed their changing role with increased participation rate, their changing role with their political empowerment, the changing role with government intervention. We can talk about that, but let's not go back to modern history because it is primarily about violence against women. So, in conclusion, it should be more about government intervention or suggestions to actually improve on this aspect. And in the introduction, there are multiple ways to introduce this question. You can talk about various forms of inequality, etc. But then, yes, you can definitely include urban and rural challenges, Pradesh. But again, you see that it has to be given very less weightage because it is about the life cycle. Because again, when it comes to various issues, for example, at one stage of life in women, in adult women, you would say dual burden of work. Because of say dual burden of work, you find harassment at workplace or violence at workplace. But now violence at workplace is more limited to urban areas. So yes, you can definitely mention that it is more of an urban phenomena. And when it comes to other forms of domestic violence, it is more prominent, or it finds more significance in rural areas. So you can mention that. You can definitely mention that. It will be an added advantage in the answer. Thinking of introduction, one is you can give out facts related to violence against women. So if you remember, during COVID, there was a report on domestic violence, increased instances of domestic violence against women. Similarly, I had given you NFHS data. So either National Crime Records Bureau, then you can talk about NFHS 5 data, where which shows that violence against women is still prominent. Then you can talk about the exceptions, that even though it is on a decline in most of the states, but there are a few states where it finds an upward trend. I had given you an example of Karnataka, for instance. So you can give out any kind of facts It can be specific to a state, as Pradesh is suggesting, that if you find any kind of stats related to violence against women in the paper, you can use those. You can use NFHS 5, but it is better to use all India stats. The reason is the question is about their life cycle, and it is better to say zoom out and look at the entire society rather than taking out a few instances or few examples from states. But if you do not have, if you do not remember, or if you do not have exact stats, it's better to use stats or facts from any report that you have recently read. And then conclusion, we have already discussed. Your body part is hair. You can just think about this. Moving on to the next question. So you see that we have related women to globalization, to family, to marriage, to urbanization. Then we have related women to controlling population growth. We have related women to poverty with feminization of poverty, feminization of agriculture. Now we are going to relate women to health. This is question is based on direct relationship between women and your topic on health. So similarly, you can find it on education, but education is going to be discussed there. But here I've included this question, and I've given the answer as well. Do not worry about it. But look at the question. The question says the determinants of women's health are multifaceted and encompass a wide range of factors beyond nutrition. So the first statement says that determinants of health of women. So first thing that has to be figured out is what are all the determinants of health of women, and they have given one of the determinant as nutrition. This is what the question says, right? And they say that the determinants of health in women, one, are beyond nutrition and also are multifaceted. How they are multifaceted and what are the other determinants of health? This is the first thing that we have to figure out. The second part says these determinants interact and influence each other, shaping women's overall health and well-being. Discuss that how these factors, various factors, impact. So how these various factors influence and interact with each other and shape the overall health of women. Now think about these determinants of health. Now the general determinants of health are again nutrition, then poverty, then you have education, awareness, etc. So the same kind of determinants will remain here in women as well, but you'll have a few specific ones, and I'll come to that part. But we definitely know that nutrition is not the only determinant of health, because even in our case, if we say that our lifestyle, if we have a very inactive and sedentary lifestyle, it will impact our health, which is beyond nutrition. If we say live in a very stressful environment, if there is a lot of stress at our workplace, if you take a lot of stress and anxiety related to your preparation, if you have instances of domestic violence, etc., everything is going to impact your health. But again, you have to see that it is not just your physical health, but your mental health as well. When you think of health, it is your mental health as well. And this year in paper 1, they have asked a question about suicide rates in women. And you'll see that how using this question and answer, you can answer that question as well. That question can consider to be a subset of this question. So the only extra thing that was required in that question was about the fact where they say that the suicide rates are on an increase. That basically comes from your NCRB data. But let's look at this question. Now, if you think of various determinants impacting women's health, you find that they range from poverty, awareness, domestic violence, the age at which the first child is born, the age of their marriage, unemployment, etc., etc., etc. So you see that there are multiple factors which impact health of women, multiple determinants of health of women, and you see that they are multifaceted. Now, again, if you see that these factors interact and influence with each other, for which you do not have to take up each and every factor and establish the relationship, but you take up one factor and establish its relationship with maybe a couple of other determinants. For instance, you take up poverty and you say if a household is poor, they, because to avoid the burden of, say, the girl in the family on the family resources, they can carry out early marriage, which is again a determinant of their health, because the early the marriage, the early the age at first child. Similarly, because of poverty, the levels of education are going to remain low. They would not be aware about cleanliness. They would not be aware about, say, family planning. Then again, you think of sanitation, because these poorer households, these poor people would be living in slums in urban areas. Then again, because of lower status of women, etc., you'll have increased instances of domestic violence. So what you have to do is basically take up one of the determinant, establish its relationship and how it influences a couple of other determinants, and then you move on to the next part, that you just briefly explain these determinants and how they impact the women's health. So if you take up, say, socio-cultural beliefs, you think of prolonged fasting. If you think of socio-cultural beliefs, women are considered to be of a lower status. So their health, all their basic needs are not being met. And also, we just have looked into various facts and stats related to gender inequality. So all those things can be used in this answer. This again is a question, and all these determinants here is an all-encompassing question. All you have to do is you have to talk about factors apart from nutrition, because nutrition is again one of the most important factors. But you would have to say in this question, now let's come back to the question. You understood the determinant part, you understood how they interact and influence each other. I hope this is done. Now let's come to your introduction and your conclusion part. Your body part, I hope you have understood. In your body part, you have discussed what are these various determinants of health, and also you have discussed that how these determinants interact with each other. So you do not have to establish the relationship between all the determinants, but a couple of determinants can be related to each other. You can take any factor of your choice. If you think about all these determinants which impact health, the conclusion is very obvious. You can talk about various government initiatives relating to health. You can talk about the Poshan Abhiyan. You can talk about the programs for pregnant and lactating women, etc. So we can talk about various government initiatives in the conclusion. Now come to the introduction part. The question says that there are a wide range of factors beyond nutrition. Now you are going to list all those factors apart from nutrition there in the body. And you do not just have to list, you just have to show that how they impact each other. And it is better you create that uh, determinants of health of women, and you show that diagram, because it'll show that you know the answer, you know everything. All you are going to do in the body part is substantiate what has been mentioned here. So please do make this kind of diagram that I've provided. Now in the introduction part, they are talking about factors beyond nutrition, but we also know that nutrition is also one of the most important factors when it comes to the health of women. So you can talk about the stats that we have used from NFHS and show the instances of malnutrition, the instances of problems related to nutrition in women. So in the introduction, you can simply talk about how nutrition is also an important factor which determines women's health. So this can be your introduction. Then in your body part, you talk about various other determinants. You talk about the interaction between various determinants. And in the conclusion part, you talk about government initiatives and suggestions, etc. So please tell me if this question is clear, or if you have any question related to this question, please let me know. Now, why I have done this is that if they are relating women to all the other dimensions, why not health? Because this is a simple question. All the determinants that I've mentioned there, most of them are general determinants of health in any kind of population. Adding a few like domestic violence, adding a few that age at first children, we have made a specific answer for this question. And now you think about determinants of mental health in women. Now, when you think about determinants of mental health, you'll find that most of these determinants are actually going to play an important role as factors of mental health of women. Because if you come from a poorer household, you'll have more stress, impacts your mental health. If there is domestic violence, directly impacts your mental health. If you're not allowed to work outside the sphere of home, impacts your mental health, increased instances of depression, etc. So all those factors can also be related directly to mental health of women. So the question that was there in the examination this year is basically a subset of this question. All you have to do is you just have to write your answer in a different manner. The determinants do not change. All you have to show is that how those determinants impact the mental health and can ultimately lead to suicide. In that question, in this question, you have to show that how these factors are going to impact the physical and mental health. You do not have to write about physical and mental health in every question, in every determinant. You can say talk about domestic violence and physical and mental harm, etc. So please tell me, please give a quick thumbs up if this question is clear. This is not a difficult question. All you have to understand is that you should be in a position to relate various aspects, various topics across the syllabus. Please give a quick thumbs up if this question is clear so that we can proceed ahead. Great, thank you. Next question says, so your mother does Annadan. Okay. Next question says that women, and now we are going to relate women and climate change. The answer to this question is there in this article. You just go through this article and you'll get your answer. But look at the question. The question says women are increasingly being seen as more vulnerable than men to the impacts of climate change. Discuss. Now we know two things. The question says women are more vulnerable, but the other idea is men are also vulnerable. And at times men can be more vulnerable. But we have to stick to this in the body part. This is your body part, wherein you show that women are more vulnerable to impacts of climate change, which will be found in this article. And we all will also briefly discuss this. But the other idea says that men are also vulnerable. So you can use this theme briefly to write. Maybe you can use an example that men are the one who will go out fishing, but because of climate change, you would not know when the sea is rough, when there is a high tide. And ultimately, they'll be more vulnerable to climate change. Similarly, when it comes to women, you can think about that women are the ones who have to, say, take care of cooking food. Women are the one who have to go out and fetch timber. Women are the one who do not have digital, say, gadgets or, say, smartphone. Because if you remember, there was a report from your eastern coast wherein because women did not have a phone at home, they did not get the warning from the government about the cyclone, and they found themselves more vulnerable. So this question also is targeted towards the gender inequality aspect. All you have to do is you have to think of gender inequality and how this gender inequality coupled with climate change can impact women. So I hope you understand this question. The question talks about how women are more vulnerable than men to the impacts of climate change. So what I'm saying is, think about various forms of gender inequality, couple it with climate change, and look at its impact on women. That's how you look at the impacts of climate change. Because ultimately, if there is, the monsoon is not regular, the crops will fail. They would not have sufficient to eat. And we find that because of gender inequality within the household, generally women are the ones who would have to compromise on nutrition. Women are the one who would have to compromise on their nutritional requirements. So simply, you can establish a relationship between gender inequality and climate change and women. This is the answer. This is the question. The answer is given here in this article. So these are practice questions. Now, when I write practice question, it means that you have to practice at home. I do not see a lot of copies coming on IS Live. So please do write answers and send it across, because this is for your help. I go through multiple articles. I go through multiple subjects. I go through research papers such as these just to find out what is relevant, what can be relevant, and what can become important for the examination to open up perspectives. And that's how I create these questions. So please, for the sake of uh, for your own sake, please write these answers. So with this, we cover this chapter on role of women. And now let's do one thing. Let's take a break. And post our break, we'll start with the next topic, that is regionalism, communalism, and secularism. Let's take a break for 15 minutes and meet again at 11:50 after the break. Please be there by 11:50 so that we can start our next discussion right away. And if you still have any questions related to role of women or population, please do feel free to ask these questions. And I'll get the PPT problem fixed. I'll just ask them to upload the social issues PPT in place of geography PPT. Okay, let's meet at 11:50. Welcome back, everyone. So, if you have any questions from the chapter on women and population, please ask. And the issue regarding the PPT, that geography annotations have been uploaded in place of social issues and justice. It has been informed to the team, and I think they would have fixed it by now. Okay, so if you do not have any questions, let's proceed with our next topic, that is regionalism, communalism, and secularism. So these are three social issues mentioned in your paper one syllabus. Now, secularism is something that you also read in paper two, because once your discussion starts from constitutional development and you move on to preamble, you have to discuss this concept of secularism. But what we'll do is, because as already two questions have been asked on the similar idea of secularism, we will cover all those ideas related to secularism. Let's start our discussion with the concept of religion, because we see that religion is also uh, a topic that falls under the ambit of social issues. And right away, let's start with the problem related to religion, that is communalism. And then we'll move on to secularism, and then we'll jump to regionalism post that. When will we start the justice portion, paper two? So basically, as I have showed you initially, that your justice syllabus will start from poverty. And the next chapter after regionalism, communalism, and secularism is poverty. So when you look at paper one and paper two syllabus, poverty finds a mention in both the papers. And then along with poverty, we have hunger. So you can consider poverty to be the starting point when it comes to paper two, that is social justice. Post poverty and hunger will take up the issues related to health. Then we'll move on to education and human resources. Then we'll move on to your various NGOs, SHGs, cooperative societies, etc. And finally, we are going to discuss various issues related to design and implementation of various policies, programs, etc. of the government. Now, also, till now, you'll find that we have already covered health and education in context of women. Similarly, when it comes to design and implementation of various programs and policies meant for the vulnerable sections, the vulnerable section of elderly and the vulnerable section of women has been covered. What we'll do is we'll take up a couple of vulnerable sections here, like your transgenders and your tribals, and then we'll move into your discussion on design and implementation related issues with the policies. And also, you do not have to look at social issues in justice and watertight compartments, as we have seen that a question on women can be asked in paper two as well. A question on elderly can be asked on paper two as well, even though they are sections of Indian society, should ideally be there in paper one. But a question can be asked in paper two on the design and implementation of policy part. And I'll tell you, because you know that there are multiple vulnerable sections, there are multiple policies. Yes, a few of those policies which find a mention in current affairs have to be discussed and have to be covered. But what I'll help you with is a general framework of design and implementation of various policies. Because within these policies, you will have programs and you'll understand a bit about it from our discussion on health and education. But nonetheless, we'll take up this topic as a separate topic towards the end of our discussion. So probably it will be done on 4th of November, and all the other topics will be covered before that. Okay, so let's start with our first theme, that is of communalism. Now, you have to understand that it is not just religion on the basis of which you find diversity in our society. You find diversity on various metrics. You find diversity when it comes to language, you find diversity when it comes to region, etc. Now, religion is one of the most important feature of Indian society. And you see, on the basis of religion and religious differences, on the basis of religious differences, you find conflict as well as cooperation in society. Again, conflict and cooperation are important features of any society for that matter. Now, when it comes to communalism, as you may understand it, that it is basically the tendency of a group of people belonging to a certain ethnic group, belonging to a certain cultural group or a social group, who feel that people, all the people coming from that certain group have similar tendencies, have similar views, have similar interests, etc. And ultimately, the specific interests of that social group come in the way of national development, of national discourse. That is how you have to understand communalism. Do not worry, you do not have to get confused by the definitions. I'll make it clear in a very easy language through the phases of communalism. And you might have understood these phases of communalism in your post independence history lectures, that there you discuss issues related to regionalism and communalism. Now the questions that can be asked may be from that modern history perspective, or can also come from a social perspective. So what we are going to do is we are going to cover social perspective, but anyways we will need a little of historical background to understand these ideas, to understand these issues. Now think about this. If a person who belongs to this particular social group, if a person feels that all these people belonging to the same social group are my friends, we have similar kind of interests, is it going to be a problem? If a person feels that I come from this particular social group and I want to give it back to the society, and primarily my own social group, is there a problem in that? If they want to give it back to their own society, to their own social group, yeah, the answer is no. There is no problem whatsoever. But if this social group thinks that their interests, their specific interests, their common interests are more important compared to other social groups and the nation at large, it will become a problem. Then they would say that whatever resources are there should be allocated for our education, for our health, and they should not be allocated for someone else. That's where it becomes a problem. And once it becomes a problem, it becomes a matter of our interest. It becomes a topic of our discussion. That how can a particular social group have opposite interests, or can come between the interests of the nation at large? That is where a problem arises. Now, when we think of communalism in the global context, you find that generally it is understood as the interests of people belonging to a same group, to a same community, to a same religion. But when it comes to Indian context, the idea of religion becomes important, because communalism in India has to be understood primarily from the point of view of religion. That means the people coming from this social group is a social group based in religion. So you see that the definition of communalism says something else, but in Indian context, it becomes something different. That in Indian context, communalism is related to religion. But communalism as a word, as a general term, does not relate only to religion. There can be other ways. Communalism, the idea of communalism between various ethnic groups, people coming from various ethnical backgrounds, from various racial groups, that is also considered communalism. But in Indian context, it is religion which finds prominence, or on the basis of which we find this issue of communalism prevailing. Now we are saying that these group of people, this group of people who belong to a certain religion, they have a liking, affinity for each other, or they have a liking for the people coming from their own religious group, which is not a problem. Now, on the basis of these liking, they say that our interests are similar, and not just our religious interests, but our secular interests as well. Religious interests you can understand in matters of religion, but when it comes to secular interests are something that are beyond religion. Interests related to education, health, politics, and all other interests. So they start feeling that all our interests, be it religious, be it secular, are similar. It becomes a problem. Why? Because this idea of communalism is not taking into account other factors. They are saying on the basis of religion, we have common interests. But what about the class that you are coming from? Do you think a poor Hindu and a rich Hindu, they'll have similar interests? The answer is no. They'll have different interests. They have different demands from life. So there can be other forms of differences within this social group, but the people belonging to this social group who believe in this idea of communalism, they say no. We as a group are important. We as a group have similar interests, and we as a group should be given prominence over any other social group. That's what the idea of communalism is. Now let's understand this idea of communalism through various phases. You can just go through these definitions. Everything will fall in place. We'll come back to it. Now, first, let's go through various phases of communalism to make it easy for you to understand. So Ragni is saying that one community falsely accusing other community. We'll come back to that idea. So the first stage of communalism is that people belonging to this certain religious group start feeling that all their interests are similar. That be it matters of politics, be it matters of employment, be it matters of religion, all our interests are similar. All the interests of Muslims are similar. All the interests of Hindus or Christians, so on and so forth, are similar. That is the first stage. And then they identify that the interests that we as a social group or we as a religious group have, that the interests of Hindus are different from the interests of Muslims. That is the second stage. They start looking into the differences that they have with respect to another community. So the interests of Hindus and the interests of Muslims are different. That is the second stage. In the third and the final stage of communalism, you find that they start feeling that not just that these issues or the interests are different, but they are opposite to each other. They are conflicting to each other. That is what the final stage of communalism is. That the first stage, they feel that the interests of all the Hindus are similar. At the second stage, they feel that the interests of Hindus are to that of Muslim are different. Then in the final stage, they feel that the interests of Hindus and Muslims are conflicting. They cannot go hand in hand. But you see that these are false assumptions when it comes to communalism. As I've given you an example, do you think the interests of all the members of a particular religious community are same? And the answer is no. Then do you think all the interests of two communities are different? That the education that should be provided to Hindus should be different, and the education that has to be provided to Muslims should be different? And the answer is again no. This is also a false assumption. Then moving on to the third stage, they say that they are conflicting. But again, you find they cannot be conflicting. Yes, in matters specific to religion, there can be a few matters where you find there are differences in opinion. But ultimately, all their secular interests are not going to be different. Everyone wants the government to be corruption free. Everyone wants the government to provide good quality education and healthcare. Everyone wants the government to have policies and programs for the vulnerable sections. And also, they ignore the diversity within the same social group. Because within the same religious group, you'll find that there are people who are differently abled. There are people who are coming from poorer houses. There are people who are coming from rich families. There are people who think of taking admission in higher education in a foreign university. Then there are people who think of getting free education or scholarship for education. So all these assumptions are actually false. So what I've done is I've summarized all the assumptions that communalism has. That primarily communalism is understood to be religion's entry into politics. You see, when you read it in modern history, we say that the entry of politics or the entry of religion in politics is communalism. But it is not. It is way beyond that. It is happening on a social level. It is not just a matter of politics, but yes, politics can be the primary factor which antagonizes people. Politics can be the primary factor which mobilizes people. Politics can be the primary factor which leads to communal violence. But ultimately, politics is the entry of religion in politics is not communalism. It is way beyond that. People having this tendency of feeling superior to another religious group, that our religion, whatever it propounds, is right, and whatever your religion propounds is wrong. People accusing other people of, say, creating communal turbulence, of creating violent conflicts. People accusing people from another religion of being criminals. What is this? This is happening on a social level. It is not merely entry of religion into politics. Then another assumption is that communalism is basically a result of religious differences. That just because people have differences in religion, this problem occurs. But you see that when it comes to differences in various other social factors, there are differences in caste, there are differences in language, there are differences in region. But differences do not necessarily mean conflict. And when we think of communalism, it is primarily about conflict. We take the case of India, and I ask you this question in our first discussion about diversity in India. I had asked you this question: what do you think, diversity model or a uniformity model, which one is better for Indian society? There we had given you an example of how India has the diversity when it comes to religion, India has the diversity when it comes to languages, culture, etc. But people have been united since forever. People have been living in peace since so long. This is also a false assumption that communalism is a result of religious differences. Then also they extend this argument saying that because of these religious differences, Indian society always had conflict. That communalism was inherent in Indian society. But we have examples from ancient India, we have examples from medieval India, we have examples from modern India, wherein you find people coming from various religious backgrounds living in peace and having no conflict whatsoever. But again, we do not have to forget that there have been communal conflicts at different points in time. There have been conflicts in medieval India. But again, religion was not the only factor. Yes, we have seen conflicts between peasants and the landlords coming from different religious groups. But again, the conflict was primarily because of the class differentiation. It was not because of religion. Then where did communalism enter Indian society? And we have to find the origins of communalism in our modern history. With the advent of Britishers, we find communalism starting or keeping its foot in Indian society. And we will come to that historical perspective. The other ideas have also been mentioned related to communalism that I've told, that when it comes to communalism, one group of people, one religious group will have hatred against other religious group. And they'll start feeling that we as two different religious groups cannot stay together. And you have seen the consequences of communalism in the name of partition of a country that is India. That there was a partition primarily on the basis of religion. When people from these two religious groups started feeling that we cannot stay together, we need a separate state. Because our interests are different, because there is going to be conflict and there has been conflict in society, we need separate states. And that's where you find partition of a country taking place. But let's see that how it started at all. And apart from these historical factors, what can be other factors which impact communalism, which breed communalism? So communalism is about conflict between various religious groups. Communalism is about hatred between these religious groups. Communalism is about these religious groups not being able to stay together in peace. So Aditya is saying, and he has a brilliant observation, that in ancient and modern India, it was primarily the struggle for power. And religion was not that significant. It was primarily the struggle of power which led to this vote bank politics, which led to communalism making a stronghold in Indian society. And we are coming to this idea, Aditya. With these basic assumptions and features of communalism, let's move towards and discuss a little of the historical perspective. You have already read about separate electorates, you have already read about communal award, you have already read about partition. All those things have been covered. But let's trace the history briefly. You find that in India, we have a lot of diversity since forever. Yes, religious diversity was also there right from the beginning, because in India we said that when it comes to tribal groups, when it comes to tribal groups, every tribal group had their own way of following religion. And it is much later that with advent of Christianity and increasing influence of Hinduism, that these tribes converted to either Christianity or Hinduism. But there are still tribes who maintain their own practices of religion. They have different rituals. There are a lot of animistic practices. And you find that some tribal groups used to believe in sky. Some tribal groups held an animal as god. So they had varied ideas, differential ideas of communalism. Similarly, we had a lot of linguistic diversity. We had a lot of cultural diversity. But still, we find more or less peaceful coexistence of various religious and other social groups in Indian society. But then, British entered the Indian society. And during the revolt of 1857, Britishers observed that these two different religious groups, that is Hindus and Muslims, when they come together, they become a greater threat to the British rule. If they come together, they can oust us without any problem. Why? Because there'll be unity amongst all these, because there is existing unity amongst all these social groups. And in revolt of 1857, you see that how Muslims, Hindus, and people from various social backgrounds came together, which the Britishers considered to be threat. And then they started with their policy of divide and rule. And you understand the policy of divide and rule, that if these different social and religious groups do not have any unity, it'll be easier for us to rule over these people. So divide these religious groups and rule over the entire country. That's what their idea was. And they started, uh, at times, what they'll do is they'll start patronizing Hindus. They'll start patronizing Muslims. They will offer them something. They'll offer them jobs. And with that, they had sown the seed of the religious differences and ultimately the idea of communalism in their hearts and minds. And then with separate electorates and issues like communal award, you find that communalism and this divide between various religious groups was becoming even finer. And ultimately, you find that the partition and the rights that followed in both India and Pakistan was a result of this seed of communalism that was sown by the British rule, by the Britishers. Then also, you find that it was not just limited to the partition, even post partition. Until today, we find we have various occasions, various incidents of communal conflicts. So, we have a recent one from Nu, that is in Haryana, communal conflict between different religious groups. Then you have Muzaffarnagar, and you have these religious conflicts, communal conflicts across the country. Now we have to see that the communal conflicts and the communal violence that takes place is not just because that people feel that they have religious differences. Yes, in the way we practice our religion, there are going to be differences, because even within the same religion, there are going to be sects. Even within the same religion, people will have differences in practices. So, for instance, there can be a Hindu from North India, and then there can be a Hindu from South India. The religious practices are going to differ. Within North India and within the same state, you'll find that different communities have different rituals. And which is very natural, because ultimately religion is a personal affair. Yes, it is a social institution, it has a social utility, but ultimately it is your personal affair. The way you practice your religion is none of my business. And similarly, the way I practice my religion should be none of your business, unless until I step on your toe, unless until I stamp on your rights, unless until I enter your personal domain. But then, what are the reasons? Because this is something that we generally understand, that if someone is practicing their own religion, it is none of my concern. But then, how do these communal conflicts take place? Sneha has asked a question that the ongoing crisis in Manipur, the bifurcation of Andhra and Telangana can be examples of these. So there is a difference, Sneha, when it comes to regional conflicts and communal conflicts. So yes, the conflict in Manipur, the ongoing crisis, by definition can be a communal right or can be a communal issue. But in Indian context, we primarily look at it through the lens of religion. That is what communalism means here. But ultimately, those kind of ethnic groups, because people are coming from different ethnic backgrounds, they are coming from different social groups, they are antagonized, they are committing violence against each other. That is also an example of communal conflict. But the bifurcation of Andhra and Telangana is something different. It is not based on religion. That is first thing. It is not based on their, say, religious identity or ethnic identity. It was primarily based on their idea of region. It was primarily based on their idea of culture. And we are going to take up, say, your regionalism as a separate topic in this chapter itself, and we'll come to it. And therein you'll find that there are visible differences between the ideas of communalism and regionalism. So yes, Aditya is suggesting Babri Masjid riots or the recent riots in Nu, the Muzaffarnagar riots. What are these? These are examples of communalism. Now we are saying there is a historical evolution of communalism, that it started with the British rule, with their policy of divide and rule, particularly post 1857 rights. And then you find separate electorates, communal awards, partition, and the following rights, etc., as a result of the seed of communalism that was sown in Indian society. But then there are other factors as well, and you always have to remember that it is more political, because it is generally because of various political and communal groups that these kind of communal violence and riots take place. Now, on a psychological level, you find that there can be fear and insecurity. Now, this fear and insecurity is not going to be natural. This has to enter through one of the source. That source can be your media. That source can be your government. That source can be your various political parties. But ultimately, the idea of fear and insecurity. For instance, when you look at minorities across the globe in any country, you'll find they'll have a sense of insecurity and fear. Because they are less in number, they might feel that we may get overpowered tomorrow. Similarly, these political leaders, these political groups and parties, what they can do is, based on some wild idea, they might say that the religious group that you see today in minority, with their population growth, 20 years down the line, their population will actually take over the population of the majority. And once they come in majority, you see what is going to happen. They're going to take over everything. And these ideas are generally based in the communal, say, representation of our history. That rather than the history of India being shown in the light of power struggle, being shown in the light of usurping more and more economic power and political power, it is shown or represented it in the form of regional conflicts. They say that the Mughal rule, it was primarily running on the basis of religion, and it was on the basis of religion that people were discriminated against, so on and so forth. So this is what basically communal representation of our history, and all these ideas you'll find will be based in that, which is not factual. Because even if you try to represent India's history in a communal light, you'll find examples from, say, the courts of Akbar, that they had a lot of, say, Hindus for that matter in their court, who were in a considerable position, who were in a position of power. Then you also find rare incidents of any kind of communal rights back in Indian history. But this communal representation of history makes it all about religion. And that is what you see today. What happens in your mass media? You open up any channel, you click on any news channel around 8 or 9 in the evening. That is the peak time where most of the people watch TV, watch television. And you find it is all about this communal representation of history. It is all about taking up a few instances from somewhere and making them the general rule. That is what happens on your mass media. So this fear and insecurity can be instilled by your media, by your political parties, by your various communal groups. Then on a psychological level, if you see that uh, whenever this issue of communalism takes shape in the way of communal rights, and in rights, people indiscriminately face violence. It is not just that people from one religious group will face violence. People from all the groups, and people who do not even belong to those two religious groups which are fighting amongst each other, are also being harassed, are also uh, going to face violence during these communal rights. Now what happens is, once these rights take place, obviously people coming from a particular religious group would feel that because of the other religious group, we had incurred all the losses. I lost my family, we were injured, I was injured beyond repair. And they will have that trauma in their mind. They'll feel that because of these rights, because of the other religious group, we are going through all this pain. Just think about the trauma of people who were displaced during partition, and they still hold that trauma because they had to go through a hard time. People, or say particularly Hindus and Sikhs, who traveled all the way from Pakistan to India barefoot and saw a lot of bloodshed on the way, and were made to live in these refugee camps in and around Delhi. Think about the trauma they had to go through. They lost everything, they lost lives, they lost families, they were injured, they were heartbroken. Don't you think they are going to pass on that trauma to the future generations as well? They'll tell their children that this is what happened to us, and you make sure this doesn't happen to you. You make sure that you take or you avenge, say, the death of your grandfather, for instance. So this trauma is not just limited to that generation. The generations that come in the future, even though they did not face that trauma, even though they were not a part of that right, they also get this trauma passed on through their culture, through their tradition, through their families. Then again, in the case of the recent new conflict, you see that it was because of misleading information and rumor mongering that the entire incident took place. That one or the other religious group, they started sending out this information that the other religious group is going to attack us. The other religious group is going to hold a procession, and ultimately, it is to our detriment. Ultimately, it is a challenge to our autonomy. It is challenge to our religious group. And because of this, these communal conflicts start taking place. There can be rumors. Think about your Manipur incident. It was a rumor. It was a fake and misleading information that was circulated across groups, because of which this horrible incident in Manipur took place. Then now you find that with urbanization and globalization, the families are nuclearizing, and we say that individualism is one of the features of globalization and urbanization, that the people do not have any community support. And because of this feeling of loneliness, because of this feeling of solitude, you need something, because obviously your religion has an emotional function. The way your family has an emotional function, the way your society has an emotional function, religion also has an say emotional function. And you find that once you move from rural areas to urban areas, either you take refuge in people coming from your own state or your own hometown, else you take refuge in people coming from your same caste group, or you take refuge in people coming from your own religion. Why? Because of this loneliness, because of this alienation that is caused by globalization and urbanization. and you seek refuge in your own people. Also, you find that when it comes to minorities, they tend to live in communes. You'll find that there is ghettoization. You go across the country, you'll find wherever there are minorities, they tend to remain in a group. They tend to remain in or stay in a group. That once, say, a few families of coming from a minority religion start living in one area, because of this fear and insecurity or the threat from the majority, they start living together so that they cannot be stamped upon. And also, you find that this insecurity can lead to, with various rumors, with say various political parties playing role, this insecurity can take a bad shape, because they say that in a democracy it is generally the will of the majority. Now, without considering other factors like class, caste, etc., without considering the developmental agenda that political parties and the people might have, they say that it is generally the will of the majority that prevails, and look, other religion is in majority. So ultimately, your will would not prevail. Your interests would not be taken care of. So I am the one, I am the political leader. Please vote for me. Please come together as one religious group, vote for me. And once I get into power, I'll be the one who will be taking care of all your interests. And this is how they spread fear, insecurity, etc. So I hope you are getting this idea. So when you talk about factors promoting communalism, you again do not have to keep them in watertight compartments, because when we are talking about this psychological factor, it is again dependent on various social and political factors. Okay, so Aditya has another good observation that Aditya says, we were saying that with globalization and modernization, religion is on a decline. The significance of religion is on a decline. And we were talking about secularization of the society, that the religion is losing its significance when it comes to matters of education, when it comes to matters of politics. But don't you think, if communalism, we are saying, is on a rise, don't you think that it is right opposite to the idea of secularization? It is right opposite to the idea of globalization and urbanization. And yes, you find this. And also, if you remember, I told you that whenever there is a change, there is always a counter change. So the change is secularization. As a reaction to secularization, as a uh, as a uh, say reaction, or you can say, we had used a term when we were discussing globalization. If you remember, we are talking about levels of impact. So we were saying that as a reaction or complete and opposite reaction to the changing force of globalization, we find localization finding importance. We find make in India, etc., a wave against globalization. Similarly, communalism is on a rise, or say secularization is on a rise. So, as a reaction to secularization, communalism, religious revivalism, fundamentalism, etc., are also on a rise. This is the counter movement. But again, the uh, path of the society, or the shape of the society, is decided by which factor is more important. So, if we start giving more and more importance to this religion and religious conflicts, etc., ultimately you see that we are undoing whatever progress we have made with respect to globalization, urbanization, and modernization. And that is what the debate is about, that whether modernization is desirable or not. Because modernization is taking us away from our culture, modernization is taking us away from our religion, modernization is taking us away from our society. Then what use does modernization have? And this is basically a conflict on the level of values. Okay, moving on to the next factors affecting or promoting communalism, you find various economic factors. Yesterday, I think someone was making this observation that if a person doesn't have any work to do, if the person doesn't have enough to eat, they can easily be, say, antagonized or mobilized against other groups. And generally, you find that when it comes to communal rights, it is people coming from these poorer sections who take part in that. Have you ever seen son or daughter of a politician, of a top ranking politician or an official or a businessman, taking up to, say, stone pelting, taking up to any form of communal violence? No. Do you think that the media person who talk about Hindu-Muslim conflict day in and day out, do you think they themselves or their uh, sons and daughters, they take part in these communal rights? No. They take admissions in foreign universities, they stay there, they live there, they lead a happy life, all away from these conflicts. And generally, it is the poorer sections, because of their low levels of awareness, because they can be incentivized using money. These are the ones who are made tools of perpetrating this violence for the sake of political gains, for the sake of vote bank politics. They are the ones who get targeted. So, as economic factors of communalism, you find unemployment and poverty. Then you find that if the entire economy is weak, if the entire economy is not developing, take examples of, say, Afghanistan. The economy is not developing, and you find a lot of conflicts happening in that society. Why? Because if you're not able to provide people with employment, look at the governments, what they do. If they're not able to provide people with a better lifestyle, if they're not able to provide people with various socio-economic facilities, they're not able to provide people with jobs, what will they do? Because sooner or later, people are going to ask, what about employment? Have you generated any employment? Because you were talking about making our lives better. And without jobs, how do you plan on making the standard of living of a country, of the people or the citizens of this country better? What options do political parties have to distract them from those ideas? To distract them on the matters of religion, to distract them on the matters of caste, because these hard-hitting questions do not have any answers. Because ultimately, governments have a limitation when it comes to employment generation or making the economy stronger. We can understand that. But also, there is this misuse of resources on the level of government because of this widespread corruption or the corrupt practices, crony capitalism, etc. They want to fill their own pockets first. And in that race, they do not care about the common people. So, if the economy is weak, it can also promote communalism. Then migration can also be another factor. And you see this migration becoming a factor, particularly in your northeastern and the southern parts of the country. People migrate from one part of the country to other, or maybe people can migrate from another country to seek refuge, to seek job opportunities. And these local politicians, take example of Trump. He was of the view that these Asians, particularly South Asians, your Mexicans, etc., they are taking away your jobs, they are stealing your jobs. And that's how he antagonized and mobilized local people against the quote unquote outsiders. Because if you think about these ideas, you can find these in form of regionalism as well. Have you seen that in the newspaper, the son of the soil policy? That people get reservation on the basis of their residence, on the basis of their domicile. If a person belongs to a certain state, take example of state of Haryana. If someone belongs to the state of Haryana, they get reservation even in private jobs. This is also based in the same idea that these outsiders, people coming from far away, are stealing your jobs just to get rid of the blame that they get that you have not been able to create employment. Look at Haryana, highest in terms of unemployed individuals, highest rate of unemployment across the country. So yes, it can be a way to employ people, but it is more of a gimmick to distract people from the actual issues. Then economic competition over the limited resources. Then again, this economic competition is between the lowest strata, is between the people coming from the lower classes, between the people who are poorer. That if people from different religious groups have shops, now because of, say, the differential income that they make through that business, they'll start having hatred towards each other. Now that hatred will take shape in the form of communal hatred. They would not understand that maybe the other person is doing something better. The other person has a better marketing strategy, or maybe they're running on low margins. But they would feel that, see, that person who belongs to another religion, who belongs to another region, has taken away my share of business. That's how the idea, or that's how economic disparity, economic inequality in various sections of the society can lead to communalism. Now, coming to the social factors which are most important in our context, you find that the you were talking about, Aditya was talking about the wave of secularization. With globalization, urbanization, modernization, secularization is also happening. That means the significance of religion is on decline. But we said when it comes to social issues, every action has an opposite reaction. It need not be equal, but will definitely have an opposite reaction. So, as a reaction to this force of secularization, you find that religious revivalism is taking place. That all these religions feel that we are losing substance, we are losing significance, and there is a tendency towards reviving their own religion. There is a tendency towards fundamentalism. There is a tendency towards marketing their religion as better. And we were saying that there is a lot of ethnocentrism when it comes to communalism. That one particular religious group feels that I am better, our practices are better, we are better people compared to the other religious group. That is what the idea of ethnocentrism is. So, with this ethnocentrism, they move out and say that our religion is better. People who follow our religion see, look at them leading a better life, and they start marketing their religion. So once religion became a market affair, religion became an economic affair, you find a new found, say, interest in religion of people. Also, it owes to the fact that individualism and secularization is on a rise, and people react to this change, because there's always going to be reaction to this change. What matters is how big is the reaction, what is the number of people, or what is the composition of people who come out in reaction. If the number of people who come out in reaction are more than the number of people who favor that change, ultimately society will change direction. So the way you find the rise of right wing across the globe, what does that depict? It shows that more and more number of people are reacting to the left wing politics across the globe. Now, we are not going into the right or wrong aspect of it. We're not looking at it through the lens of value, but we are saying that there is always going to be reaction. And ultimately, the ones who are more in number, the wave which becomes prominent will change the direction, will actually, say, head the society in that particular direction. So, yes, you can say ultimately communalism is driven by politics. Because ultimately, who would say this? For their political gain, generally these political parties, political workers will incite this hatred amongst various communal groups. Then you have negative role of media and social media. And you see this. I don't think this needs any explanation. The way your debates are being carried out on your news channels. I'm not going to name the channels, but you already know what are those channels on which these kind of negative debates around the religious identity of people goes on. And as a consequence, you see that it mobilizes people against another religious group. Then you'll have killings in the name of what a person from another religion eats. Then you'll have killings, mass killings in the name of religion. This is what happens. This is what the negative role of media is. And again, social media has become an important tool. Look at all the political parties, all these religious and communal groups, and various caste-based, etc. groups. What are they doing? They are using social media as a tool because they know India has a demographic dividend. India has a lot of young population. And most of this youth uses social media. And this is the group which can be mobilized. This is the group which is the largest chunk of the vote bank. And if you mobilize this group, if you turn this group in your favor using social media tools, various tools of marketing, fake news, misleading information, etc., you can actually hold ground when it comes to politics. You'll have more number of voters in your favor. And that's how they use social media. Again, the social media, I'm not saying that it is only limited to political groups. It can also come from individuals. There are various individuals who believe in this idea, who believe in this distorted idea of Indian history, or this distorted uh, communal representation of Indian history, and they also spread their ideas. But generally, you'll find that most of the people who do that are affiliated either to a particular social group or a political group. Then you have various religious fanatic organizations that are coming up, that are growing. Also, with growing population, you find there is more fight for those limited resources. The fight for the resources also, again, becomes an economic factor. This growing population, which is a demographic process or which is a social process, takes shape in the form of economic conflict. Then misrepresentation of religion. And this misrepresentation of religion generally extends to both your and other religious groups' religion. So they would say that, see, this is what is perpetuated by our religion. This is what the religious doctrine is. This is what you have to follow. And they will not say the way they say represent the religion or interpret the religion is going to be different from what those ideas actually mean. And also, they'll try to misrepresent another's religion as well. They would say that, look at the instances of violence that you find in their spiritual and religious texts. See, this religion is based on violence. This religion started from violence, and they believe in violence. They believe in conversions. They believe in taking over the whole globe. They believe in taking over the whole world. And once they do that, once they have considerable numbers in terms of population, once they have converted sufficient number of people, they are going to change the shape and features and everything of all the societies across the globe. This is what misrepresentation of a religion. So it can be misinterpretation of your own religion or misinterpretation of another religious text. Then the issue related to forced conversions. Now these religions, because it has become a market economy. Now think about the economy that is around various, say, religious practices, etc. It is very considerable in number. To have more and more people in your religion, to legitimize your religion more and more, these religious groups tend to convert people from another religious group to have a majority. And not just majority, you find that it is again based in the political ideas. It is based in the political vote bank, that you'll have more number of people. If you offer them, say, if there are people who are unemployed, if you offer them job in the name of religion, you can get them converted. Ultimately, they'll become your vote bank. Similarly, if that is not possible, if a particular religion is in majority somewhere, either they chase away people from other religious minority groups or they convert them forcibly. That is what happens. This is what forced conversion is, which also becomes a factor for promoting communalism. Why? Because people from the other religious group from which people have been converted, you'll find they get mobilized, they get antagonized. That how can you do this to people from our own religious group? And basis that, they can commit violent activities. Ragni is saying that intra-religious conflicts also occur with misinterpretation of religious doctrine. Absolutely, yes, they can. Then role of social media in promotion of some religious leaders. And you have given a name, but it's better not to use names when it comes to matters of politics, because ultimately, see, politics is something that has entered your social personal life. As Aristotle puts it, that man by nature is a political animal. So everyone has one or the other political and social bias. Some would favor one idea, some would favor other idea, but you do not know who's going to evaluate your copy. So it is always better to use these in abstract manner. It is always better to use historical examples when it comes to this. Yes, you can always talk about, say, the current conflicts that are happening in our society, Manipur, Haryana, etc. but you need not put the blame on one particular community, on one particular political party or individual. So we have to stay neutral. And because this is what is being done, and this is what is expected of a bureaucrat, because you cannot take a side, you have to be impartial, you have to be neutral, right? You read these values and ethics, and I believe you have covered ethics. So you have to be careful about using contemporary examples. That is the only thing that I mean. Now, there is this idea of communal politics. We are saying that politics is the central idea when it comes to communalism and communal rights and violence. Now, this communal politics is based on the idea that religion is the basic identity, forms the basis of identity of any social group, of any individual. That your religion should be the most important identity that you should have. It has nothing to do with your occupation. Your identity has nothing to do with your language. It has nothing to do with your region. But religion is the most important basis of your identity. And people coming from these religious groups, from a particular religious group, will have all the interests, be it religious or secular, to be similar. And I have already given this as a contradiction, because this is the basic assumption behind communal politics. And you see that there are parties which vouch to a particular religious idea, and they'll have their vote share, they'll have their vote bank in that particular religious group, and will barely have maybe a little vote bank in the other religious group or in the other caste group. That's how our politics is dominated, by communal politics and caste-based politics. Also, look at ourselves. How often do we vote individuals? How often do we vote parties on the basis of the ideas that they represent, on the basis of work that they have done, on the basis of their ideas about development, on the merit of that particular politician or individual? It is generally on the basis, on some common ground, that we vote for a particular political party or individual. Because this communal politics does not start from the top. It is basically a bottom-up process. Because if the society is sensitized, if people start understanding the importance of maintaining peace, if people start understanding these ideas behind communalism, and that it is primarily for the political gains that these political parties incite violence and hatred amongst you, it would be very hard to mobilize those people. Trust me on that. Can someone mobilize you, or can someone make you commit violence in the name of religion? If I ask you this question, and most of you would say no. The reason is because you are aware, you know that it is for their own political gain. You can definitely ask that politician a question, please send your daughter and son, please send your family members with me, and yes, I'll happily take up to violence. And that, you know, they would not, because ultimately they are going to gain politically from the acts that you commit, because the actual gain is not coming from that political violence. The actual gain is coming from the divide that happens in that society post those riots. Once that kind of violence happens, the society gets divided. So the way Britishers have been accused of using the policy of divide and rule, we can put the same blame on our own politicians, on our own on our members of the society, because that's the game they also play. The way they say that it has always been, politics has always been a perpetual struggle for power, it is right to that extent. It is always about usurping that political power, having the dominance over all the other members. Because once you remove discretion, and I give this example, once you remove all the perks, once you remove all the discretion, once you remove all the extra money that, or the corrupt practices that help you make more money, once you remove all that from the civil services, we'll see how many people struggle for this examination. Because the ones who have laid down this structure, this Indian civil services here in India, they do not have the similar kind of hubris for the civil services back in their own country. Why? Because they do not have these perks. Those perks were primarily meant for their own people. so that they could have dominated over Indian society. But we are following the same practice. And you see that if you go to Britain, you go to UK, you do not find the same kind of hubris around politics, around bureaucracy. Why? Because they have detached those perks. So someone who is genuinely interested in administration would actually go for it, and not for the sake of social status, not for the sake of getting a better remuneration. People would not take up this job for that matter. Yes, there can be few who are genuinely passionate about the civil services, but ultimately we find that the corrupt practices, crony capitalism, etc., that is there prevalent in our society generally comes from this idea, because that is what our idea behind getting a government job is: better status, better uh, dominance in the society, dominance over others, right? These are our ideas. And even politics, for that matter, runs behind capturing power. It is all about that power struggle. They would not care if their own brothers, their own sisters get butchered because of their acts. They'll shamelessly go on proceeding with the same means, because ultimately it is about having that power. Okay, coming back to communal politics. So I hope you have understood the idea of communal politics, that it revolves around the idea that religion is the basis, or the most important basis of identity of an individual, and on the basis of religion, all your religious and your secular interests become similar. And I have disputed this with your basic assumptions, saying that a poor Hindu and a say rich Hindu cannot have similar interests. The simple idea is that the richer ones are looking for getting a rebate when it comes to income tax, whereas the poorer ones are looking for getting 2 square meals a day. They're looking for a little subsidy on agriculture. And providing subsidy on agriculture is right opposite to the interests of a corporate, a right opposite to the interests of a rich businessman, because ultimately it is going to harm their business, right? This is just an example. I'm not saying that they'll always have conflicting interests on the basis of their class, but the idea is they cannot always have conflicting and similar interests on the basis of religion. That's what the idea is. So remember that example. Then the other idea is politics of appeasement, that they will start appeasing one or the other social religious group to convert it into their vote bank. Generally, this appeasement is understood to be minority appeasement in terms of, or in context of, one political party in a country. And you find that they say generally one political party appeases the minority. They give them handouts, they give them reservation, they give them money, they give them say leeway when it comes to various kind of businesses and other criminal activities, and that's how they consolidate their vote bank. But this appeasement, the politics of appeasement, is not just limited to minority. It extends very well to majority, because ultimately, just if we use logic, if we use maths, stats, we find that it is the majority community which is ultimately going to decide who's going to win and who's going to lose. So appeasing the majority makes more sense, for that matter. If you appease majority of the people in a society, in a particular state, in a particular country, you are sure, 100% sure, that you are going to win the elections. So there is this politics of appeasement. And in this politics of appeasement, be it of the minority or the majority, you end up antagonizing the other section or the other religious group. If you appease the minority, you end up antagonizing the majority. If you appease the majority, you go on antagonizing the minority religious group, which can ultimately promote communalism. Then there can be inflammatory and hate speeches, to which again you have multiple examples from Indian politics, but also you do not have to use specific names of individuals or names of political parties. You can just talk about that inflammatory and hate speech becomes widely prevalent just before the elections, just to convert that vote bank. Then also, it is the on the level of politics, it cannot just be the role of, say, your internal members of the society. It can also flow from other countries, other state and non-state actors. That there can be other countries, because you look up, think about terrorism in a country, again perpetuated by some other country, by state and non-state actors, by Pakistan. Similarly, the ideas of communalism or the promotion of communalism can also happen because of various state and unstate actors. Then also on a political level, we were saying that post the riots, people have this trauma in their minds because they have seen a lot of bloodshed. And if you know that sociologically, you find that this trauma or this sudden change in the society also leads to depression and ultimately suicide, because this also happens. Now, if those victims of those rights, if they are not provided justice in time, if they are not rehabilitated properly, and you know that justice delayed is justice denied, they'll have that trauma, they'll hold on to that trauma for years to come if you do not intervene in time, if you do not provide them justice, which also becomes a factor which can promote communalism, as already discussed. Now, these were various factors related to communalism. Now, another thing that you have to think about is what can be the suggestions to actually improve? What can be the suggestions to push the idea of communalism down? And we are going to come back to those suggestions. Now, before we end this session, just look at this question. What we'll do is, post your lunch break, we are going to discuss this question. I'll just explain everything. You have to absorb the idea and think about it during your lunchtime. Now, communalism arises either due to power struggle, and now you see, someone had suggested that it is because of power struggle. Communalism arises either due to power struggle or relative deprivation. So they are saying that behind communalism, there are either political factors, that is, struggle for power, or it can be economic factors in the form of relative deprivation. Argue by giving suitable illustrations. Now, we already know that it is not just limited to political and economic factors. And within economic factors, it is not just related to relative deprivation. Here in political, they say it is because of power struggle. We know one idea is that there are multiple dimensions. It can happen because of various social factors. It can happen because of various psychological factors. That's what we had just discussed, right? And within these dimensions as well, we find that it is not only due to power struggle or only due to relative deprivation. So which forms one part of your answer. But again, it has to be given very little weightage. That too in your conclusion or introduction. In your introduction or conclusion, you can give a little weightage to this idea and then move on to your body part, where you would have to illustrate using examples that how power struggle and relative deprivation can lead to communal conflict. That is going to be your body. And if you write very negatively in the body part, you have to make your conclusion positive using various suggestions to tackle this menace of communalism. Yes, there are historical factors as well, Sneha. So what we'll do is, we are going to take up this question again after the break, and we are going to discuss this question again. But please think about this question during a break. Think about all the factors that we have just discussed, and think about how other factors can also lead. Even though in our question, we have to limit our answer to these two ideas, power struggle and relative deprivation. But do think about other factors as well. It'll be a quick revision for you, and also it'll give you enough content for the answer. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's meet after the break at 2 p.m. Please do have your lunch. Come back with renewed energy, and we are going to continue this discussion on communalism. Then we are going to move on to secularism and regionalism. So your session between 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. will try to cover all the three ideas, and maybe we can start with poverty as well. And post that, you'll have a session starting from, I believe, 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. Yes, there is another half an hour break post that, and the next session post that will start at 5:30 p.m. Okay, so let's take our lunch break and meet again at 2 p.m. You have to join the session which has already been scheduled. And if you have any questions, you can ask those questions in the next session. Thank you, everyone.